Welcome to the All Things Endurance podcast. I'm your host, Rick Prince, and I'm excited to have on the podcast today David Callahan. He is the co-CEO of Ultrasignup, which is the leading marketplace and registration platform for the trail and ultra community. So, David, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Rick. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. So maybe before we kind of get into the meat of the podcast, if you could tell our listeners maybe a little bit more about your background, both professionally, athletically. I know that I'm not sure if you were still practicing law. I know you did that previously, so maybe if you could touch on that as well.
I started my professional career in the practice of law. I went through college on the very traditional lawyer path, political science and economics. I sort of knew that's where I was going to go, and I got into the practice of law right out of law school, and it was a interesting, stimulating, challenging journey for me. I practiced in the area of tax and estate with a sort of niche specialty in estate litigation.
Hmm.
So think, arguing over mom and dad's money after they pass away, or
Okay.
dad gets a girlfriend after mom dies and leaves everything to her.
Okay.
That sort of stuff, which, like I said, was a real niche specialty. So it ended up having me travel all over the country for cases,
Hmm.
litigating them, and it was exciting and adventurous and stimulating, but it also got pretty tiring to deal with. It was a different type of family law. It was brothers and sisters fighting as opposed to husbands and wives, and so it just
Hmm.
became pretty taxing. I had my own law firm, and so I was sort of managing the firm and trying to deal with these litigation cases. And at the same time, children came along, right? And so that just sort of enhances all of the pressures of life. And eventually, I found out that maybe one of my personal flaws was that it was very difficult for me to have a hard day at the office, arguing all day long, and then come home and have a lot of patience for young children in the house being.
Sure.
And so it just felt like that was not going to be the path that I really wanted to stay on. I really wanted to prioritize my ability to have a healthy home life with young children. And so I started looking at sort of pivoting away from the active practice of law around 2018, 2019. And then sort of as I was deciding on the next chapter of life, a group of us here in Nashville that were friends and sort of former colleagues all got introduced to the opportunity that Ultrasignup may be for sale. And so
Hmm.
that it wasn't something we were out looking for. It was, we're not a investment group or fund that was out sort of looking for companies to buy, but we all had a deep passion for endurance sports. And when it came across our radar that it might be available, we all sort of stepped off the cliff and went after it. And that was 2019,
Wow.
which was an exciting time.
Yes.
We targeted a close in March of 2020, which ended up being an exciting time for entirely different reasons. And and so we ended up pausing on that just because obviously the world was in such a state of confusion and disarray at that point. But we watched the community, the way the community responded to the race directors, the way the race directors responded to the platform. And then September 25th, 2020, with masks on at a public park. We signed all the closing documents on picnic tables, 6 feet away from each other, which is sort of a wild memory, right? You're buying a business that is completely dependent upon people being able to gather together and breathe on each other, and we couldn't even close on the business anywhere but a park with masks on, 6 feet
Wow.
away. So that's sort of the quick rundown of my professional life. Athletically, I grew up a soccer player, baseball player, and then I hit a growth spurt and became a basketball player. So I'm
Yeah.
I'm 6'7". A lot of people don't sort of see that from me sitting behind a desk, but became a basketball player. And then after high school, sort of gave that up and really focused on school. And then once I started practicing law, I needed a way to vent the stress of the practice of law. And so I dove really deep into triathlon. And so for 5 or 6 years, I was sort of all things triathlon all the time. Ended up racing about 100 races in the span of 4 years, and I
Oh,
finished
wow.
Yeah, I finished the last year of racing, really, really active racing with, I did 52 triathlons in 52 weeks with
Oh my goodness.
raising money for a local charity here in Nashville. We had a 3-month-old baby in an RV. It was my wife and I with our first baby packed in an RV, that and a bike, sort of zigzagging across the country racing. So, endurance racing, like for a lot of people, sort of bit me hard, and I always sort of dreamed of a day where I could find a way to make supporting the sport sort of my profession. And so when Ultrasignup came along, that's why we really took the leap and ran with it. So yeah, that's the background. The great irony is I don't race much anymore. Yeah, anyone
Yeah.
can check my Ultrasignup profile. It's not littered with results. This is the biggest warning I'll give to anyone. When you merge your passion and profession, a lot of times what ends up happening is you end up doing your passion less because you're out there trying to help other people do it more. And so
Yep.
still run a lot, but racing has taken a sort of back seat for a little while, which is also fine with me. So
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, I've definitely found that on my end. And when I talk to a lot of the coaches here at USCA that have become certified, they say the same thing, especially as their coaching practice grows, they're overseeing other coaches. And like, to your point as well, they're like, and I'm fine with it. It is what it is. And it's kind of just a different chapter.
yeah, yeah. For me, like I said, I used racing and training as an escape from my work. For me, that was what it was.
Yeah.
I didn't love what I did every day, but I really loved the thought of getting out and getting on my bike or getting in the pool or getting a run in. And so I really structured my day around that. What I have found for me professionally is that when I'm working on something that I'm really passionate about, I'm willing to sit at my desk longer. I'm willing to have a more unhealthy relationship with my phone. I'm willing to do all the things that help drive the sport forward because I'm not finding myself trying to run away from my job, which
Yeah.
was what I was doing before. And so for me, I think that's why it happens. I want to spend the time on the sport. I want to spend the time on what we're building. I want to spend that. And so I'm more excited about the work that I'm doing now than I probably ever was before.
Yeah. That's great. We're hopefully where everybody wants to land, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's a nice place. I enjoy it a lot. I mean, the role that we're in, it's still challenging. It's still stressful. Every day has its own, being a small company, you set a direction for your company and you try and stick to that as much as you can. And you realize that every single day when you wake up and check your email, something may push you slightly off course that you have to deal with that day, right? It's a
Yeah.
constant adaptability and flexibility to not only your own business challenges, but the shifting nature of the industry as a whole. So it's never a boring day. I guess I could say that, which
Yeah.
is nice. So
That is nice. That
yeah.
is definitely nice. You, even more than me, obviously see the popularity of ultra running just skyrocket. Um, more so, I look at the statistics, and again, I'm sure you have quite a few on your end as well, but I look at the stats of sort of marathons, 10Ks, 5Ks, and a lot of that is, fairly flat, but ultra running, and we see it here as far as the people that sign up for our certification. So, what are some of the key factors in the people in your community, people that you talk to, that are really driving this popularity?
Yeah, well, if you think back to how maybe you got exposed to your sport of choice or how I got exposed to my sport of choice, it tends to happen through friends. Like friends either recommend that you come to CrossFit with them or you come out on a trail run with them or you try this new hot yoga thing that they got exposed to. So there's a concept that you hear in the technology space a lot called network effects, right? It's the word of mouth sort of virality growth of businesses. Like my experience in trail running is more fun if I bring friends along with it to do it with me. And so I think
Sure.
there's some of that effect that's happening is that as a as the sport grows, the word of mouth begins to spread about how great the sport is, and people start bringing other people. Like probably the most um, applicable example right now for everyone is pickleball, right? We all
Yeah.
have a friend who has played pickleball who rants and raves about how awesome pickleball is, and they normally say, "You just have to come with me and try it. You just have
Yeah.
to try it once, and you'll understand." That is pickleball is in a moment of like hyper growth because of that.
Yeah.
Trail running, I think, is on a much more steady growth trajectory than that pickleball rage is, but it's the same underlying dynamics of people falling in love with the sport And then when we fall in love with something like this, we want to share it with other people. We
Yeah.
want them to see what we see and experience it. So there's that going on. I think there's a second factor as well, which is that the industry is beginning to get broader media exposure outside of our own little echo chamber, right?
Hmm.
So before, and I'll say, 8 to 10 years ago, when I talk about before, this was a pretty insulated media community. We had our half dozen, maybe dozen media outlets that really were talking about the sport, but it wasn't showing up in the Wall Street Journal or the Guardian or the New York Times. There weren't ultra runners showing up on mainstream podcasts, right? It was a pretty insulated community. Well, once the story starts getting told more broadly to the community outside of the endemic core, then that also drives the interest in the sport, right? It's,
Yeah.
can I do that? And we saw it that probably the 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 strongest example of this was, the Barkley Marathons documentary, the race that he,
Yeah.
like, if you were to look back at the trajectory of the sport, that was a pretty good catalyst for growth because
Yeah.
it exposed people to something that maybe they'd never heard of. It also was told in a way that stimulates a lot of personal curiosity about people's ability to do these things. And then you had David Goggins, who came out and had a stint as an ultra runner, which also reached a whole other community of people that I don't think had been exposed to it. So one, I think it's the network effect slash virality of the sport, but then I also think it's the fact that the sport's showing up more and more frequently in mainstream sort of non-endemic media that's exposing people to running in the woods and beautiful places. And as long as the stories keep getting told in a fashion that leads people to believe that there's transformations that happen in the woods, I think that growth is going to keep going. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, those are great points. It's funny you mentioned that about pickleball, and I think that's a great analogy. Do you know Nancy Hobbs?
I do know Nancy. So yeah, whenever I see Nancy, we always try and give each other a hug because, like I said, I'm 6'7" and I think she's 4'10", and so
Something like that. Yeah.
it's a great image whenever Nancy and I get together. So
Yeah. I met her down in the Springs to pick up some stuff for the conference, for the trail running conference for American Trail Running Association. And I met her at a pickleball place and she's like, "Have you ever tried pickleball?" I'm like, "I mean, no, I know that everyone else in the world has done it, but not me." She's like, and she just could not stop raving about it. She's like, "I thought I'd do it one time." She's like, "Now I'm in a league. I come here 5 times a week."
yeah.
To your point.
Yeah, that's powerful. The dream of any brand is to have word of mouth spread about their brand, right?
Yeah.
That's what every brand craves. The same is true for a sport, right? An industry as a whole. And that's what's happening. That's really what's driving the growth of pickleball at such a rapid speed. Is because one, it felt like it was created out of whole cloth. Like it just seemed like it appeared out of nowhere all of the sudden. And like there was this group that got exposed to it all together at first, and then they became, evangelists for that.
Yeah.
Our sport has been here longer, obviously, right? And so the evangelism has taken like a different cadence in terms of
Hmm.
how rapidly it spreads, but it definitely feels like it's getting to a point now where where it's spreading faster and faster and faster.
Mm.
I still think it's at a healthy rate. We're not at. I would be worried if I was a pickleball company just because of the. Someone told me not too long ago that there are 250 companies making pickleball paddles.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, that's not sustainable, right? There
Yeah,
there will
agreed.
be winners, like a few winners that will end up sort of winning out against all the rest. We don't have that, right? We don't have 250 companies making shoes or 250 companies making packs. So I think we've grown in a much healthier way. It's going to be more sustainable long term, and we
Yeah.
shouldn't experience any type of rapid market adjustment in our
Yeah.
sport. I don't hope that happens to pickleball. I'm not sort of wishing that,
Right.
but those are the things I'd be cognizant of if I was wanting to jump into the pickleball industry. It's
Yeah, fair enough.
the
Fair
bubble,
enough.
right? So
Yeah. So One of the things that we see in our we have a coaches group, a Facebook coaches group where people can chat and anyone who got certified. And we hear a lot of chat in this group about hey, I have a client or an athlete who's training for this distance or that distance. What do you see on your end as far as the stats from Ultra Sign Up? Like, is it like 50K, 100K, 100 miles? Like, are there any trends that you sort of see that are really becoming popular or sort of scaling up faster than others?
Yeah, so the sport is pulling against like the edges. And by that
Mm,
I mean the growth is happening in the sub-ultra space up
okay.
to the 50K distance, and then it's happening at the 200-mile distance and beyond.
Okay.
Now the percentages, and I don't have them handy, but the percentages are all relative, right? So the 200 and beyond distance was a small relative category to the broader ultra running. So it's like the percentage growth looks bigger, like it's growing at something like 30 or 40% per year, but it's starting from a much smaller base.
Sure.
But it's still a very robust growth rate, and more race directors are creating beyond 100-mile distance races, I guess is the best way to think about it. What
Okay.
we're sort of coining the uber ultra distances, right?
Okay.
We never thought we'd need to come up with a distance longer, but there's these uber ultra distance races that are starting to be crafted, and it's resonating with a certain percentage of the population, right? So that's seeing really strong growth, and then the sub ultra up to 50K, uh,
Okay.
which is I know a little bit contradictory. It's so maybe 50K and below is what I should say. Like that's where the next strongest growth is happening, and the reason for that largely is that's the entry point for people to come into the sport, right? That
Sure.
most people don't start at 100K or 100 miler when they enter into the sport. They start somewhere and ladder themselves up, even if they came from a marathon background. Marathon road runners pretty quickly learn that a marathon on the trail is a whole different beast, right? It takes a different style of running and racing. It takes different, muscle dependency, stuff like that they haven't built before. And so even if they come from the marathon distance, they're probably still going to ladder up through some of the shorter distances before they really move into the ultras. Now, we're still seeing respectable and healthy growth at the ultra level, and that's sort of what should be expected, right? You start with a big base of runners at the sub ultra distance world, and only a certain percentage of them are going to matriculate up through marathon, 50K, 100K. Like every time you move, it truly is a pyramid, right? A
Yeah.
pyramid of participants. And so we're still seeing healthy growth. There's still a healthy number of people that are entering the sport at the sub ultra distance that are wanting to matriculate up through the longer distances. So I still think we have a really robust pipeline of sub ultra distance runners that are going to be feeding these ultra distance races in the future. So
Gotcha. Gotcha. No, that makes complete sense. And this is sort of, I guess, a combination of sort of some of the stuff you were talking about before about the sport of ultra running and maybe also what we were just talking about. But where do you see the sport of ultra running, in 5, 10 years from now? You had talked obviously about pickleball, maybe hitting that inflection point, versus ultra running is more on sort of a steady course. What does that look like again, I'm not sure if you were ever asked this question, but yeah, like what does it look like 5 to 10 years from now?
so I think you're going to see the entry of non-endemic brands into the sport.
Okay.
So you're going to see the Amex and the AT&T and T and Delta Airlines and Toyota. We can debate sort of whether that's good or not, but I think we're going to begin to see that. And the reason I say that is because one, the sport is not only gaining broader visibility for athletes to want to participate in it, but it's also getting broader visibility to the economy as a whole, right?
Hmm.
We've seen this, when Lululemon all of a sudden decides that they were going to move into trail, right? That's a signal. That's a signal because
Yeah.
they're not an endemic trail running company, but they thought that there was an avenue where they could carve out a certain demographic of customers in trail. So they've made that effort to expand in here. That's because they got exposed to what was happening in the sport and thought it was a compelling narrative. So that's going to happen more and more with the non-endemics, and we're beginning to see early signs of that. None of them have taken a big step in, but we're beginning to see early signs. And from their perspective, the demographic of trail and ultra is not that dissimilar to the demographic of golf or tennis, right?
Hmm.
It's a pretty affluent demographic, especially when you get into the ultra category.
Yeah.
And these non-endemic brands are beating themselves up over in those industries, fighting for sponsorship deals when one of them is going to realize I can talk to almost the same people over here for a whole lot less money without battling anybody else for.
Yeah.
And so like once that happens, then you'll have follow-on effects. So I think we'll begin to see that, which will be exciting for race directors. It'll be exciting for professional runners because it's the path to deeper revenue opportunities for them, and really like the early stages of being able to have like a real professional category of runners. And so that's the second part. I think we will begin to see more professionalization at the very pointy end of the spear in this.
Hmm.
I think you will see more and more athletes really being able to have full-time careers as athletes, beginning to become more and more household names. We've obviously got Courtney and Jim and
Yep.
Billion, and like we've got a handful, but I think that'll continue to grow. And then I also think you're going to see a really, really exciting sub-ultra community get built in terms of the professional side of the sport. I think
Hmm.
there are a lot of trail curious road and track athletes that want to see what all this chatter is about trail. And I think they're realizing that the pointy end of the spear and road and track is super pointy. Like really,
Yeah.
and if you're not at the tip of that, it's it's going to be really hard for you to make your way onto the tip of that spear and really have a career there. And so I think there's going to increasingly be some really, really fast, currently professional road and track athletes that we're going to start seeing towing the line in trail races. And I also think you're going to see collegiate athletes that don't have a path to going straight to road and track. I think they're going to view this as the third avenue to becoming a professional runner out of college. And so I think, that's going to be a really exciting time for the sport. I also think in 5 to 10 years, there's probably going to be a North American trail series of some sort. I think there's going to be something built here in the US that's going to rival what we're seeing in Europe.
Mm.
Um, there's a lot of talent here in the States. There's a lot of beautiful courses here in the States. There's a huge audience in the state. And most of the current, you look at UTMB, you look at Golden Trail, those are really designed to send the attention of the sport to Europe as opposed to North America. Um, so I wouldn't be shocked if we saw the development of some US trail series that was really designed to highlight the trail racing that's happening here and bring more of the attention in a season long fashion to the US as opposed to sort of one off. Obviously, we've got Western States, we've got Hard Rock, there's Leadville, Livermore. Like we have a lot of iconic races, but there's sort of no continuity to that story. I think
Yeah.
that someone's going to grab hold of and build a series around, and it's going to be interesting to watch. So
Yeah, interesting. Now, those are all really, really great points. I want to go back to that first point you made about these brands coming in, Toyota, these brands that aren't ultra specific or even running specific. Um, you know, Sort of with the rise of ultra running, we've seen in the cycling world a similar rise with gravel, which I think has, some other reasons people don't want to get run over by cars. They want to get out there in nature more, so on and so forth. I think rock climbing has already kind of gone through that as well. And certainly on the cycling front, what I've seen is that there's a lot of for people that just started, kind of got in on the grassroots level. They're like, oh man, and now Toyota's coming. This is their cool little like niche sport is now they
yeah.
feel it's going the way of like the NFL or something like that. Obviously, there will be some of that. Do you think that? Do you think that's going to be a thing within the ultra running world, as you know, again, not with the pros so much, like you said, because that might enable them to make a living at it, or more of a consistent living. But the average Joe like myself, like I go out for a run and I'm like, oh, this is just ruining the sport. This is just crazy.
Yeah, it's a difficult balance, and I live in Nashville, and Nashville is going through a very similar period of expansion. It's
Mm,
one of the it cities in the US, which
yeah,
means that headquarters are being moved here, and Californians and New Yorkers and Connecticut, like this is where people are moving for a lot of reasons. But fundamentally, people are moving here because it's a good place to live, right?
yeah,
It's got great music and great restaurants and professional sports and Four Seasons, and so I'm living through it personally as a resident of Nashville, and I'm seeing a very similar trajectory happening in trail. And the challenge and the way that I sort of reconcile this with me is you can't live in a good place and not have other people want to live here too, right? It's
yeah.
sort of a consequence of building something great is that other people want to be part of it. And the
Sure.
same thing is happening in trail, right? People are beginning to recognize how great the sport is and how transformative it is and how the unique characteristics and qualities of it as compared to road racing maybe once that happens, and again once people spread the word and spread the word and spread the word, it becomes very difficult to keep this thing all to yourself.
Yeah,
And because this is not something that any of us can control, we also have to be willing to accept that it's going to grow. It's a lot like water running down a mountain, right? It's going to find a path that we can't control entirely. And it there will be some people that feel like the sport has left them, like that the sport has moved on from them, which is going to be very hard because this sport is one that becomes part of people, right? It becomes part of their identity. It becomes part of their lifestyle. And when you feel like something that's part of you has moved on from you, that's very difficult to reconcile. But the inverse is, just another example in Nashville is, if you don't want people moving here, you need to make the city less appealing, less attractive. It
right,
probably
right.
makes it less fun for you to live in as well.
Yeah,
And so, yeah, with the growth of trail, the inverse is that we have contraction, right? Our friends who are coaches don't have those jobs anymore. Are these new bespoke companies that are building great shoes and great apparel and great, there's not going to be room for them anymore, right? Like the inverse of growth is not stasis, right? It's not staying the same. It's most commonly contraction. And
yeah,
contraction's hard and it's painful, and yeah, the sport may, I don't know, the sport won't grow beyond its bounds at that point, but it also, and we see it in triathlon, right? Triathlon went through this period where
yeah,
it
correct.
grew through the late 2000s, and like 2014, 2015 it started to decline, right? And it's been a pretty painful period for people that were deep in that industry to weather that. And I'm sure there were some people in the community in 2012, 2013, 2014 that were bemoaning growth, right? That this is not the way we want to grow. And they got to live through the experience of, all right, well, let's go the other way then. Let's stop growing and see and I would bet most of them, if they were in the industry, probably felt like that was much worse than just trying to manage growth. Uh,
Yeah,
so so we're aware of it. It's something that I think is almost inevitable at this stage, right?
yeah,
There's no guarantee of growth into the future, but there at this stage in 2025 and 2026 and 2027, I would say growth is going to happen. There's going to be newcomers to the sport. There are going to be people coming to the sport late to the party, and it's going to feel like they're here now just because they feel like there's money to be made here, which is, there's going to be some truth to that. The hope is that they also, as they come to the sport, they realize if we're going to extract value from the sport, we also need to create value within the
yeah,
sport, right? And hopefully are contributing more value than they're extracting. But it's going to be an interesting time, and it's funny. I went back and read some of the very early editions of Ultrarunning magazine, like from the early 80s.
Mm,
Um, which if you haven't done it, if you're a member of Ultrarunning magazine, you can go look at the archives online. And it's just amazing to blast back 40 plus years and read about the sport 40 years ago. So
yeah.
there is no misconception about how people remembered it. You can actually pull the magazine out and read it. And Gary Cantrell, Laz, has been writing for Ultrarunning magazine for 40 years. And so I read some of his early posts. And it was early 1981. He's talking about how media is going to ruin the sport, right? That the
Mm,
media and the sport's going to. So every generation has this sense that the sport is growing beyond them, right? Now,
yeah.
Laz is still here. He's still obviously very much part of the sport, but when you go back and look at that moment in time and think I'm certain that's how he felt then, but he's learned to adapt and adjust and still feels like he has a place in the sport that matters to him. And so,
Yeah.
so it's not an easy answer, but I do try and reconcile, what the sport's been through in the past and where we're going in the future. Because, when Gary was, and this is why Gary makes everybody wear non-GPS watches at the Barkley, right? It's a little bit of the nod to the past of this is how racing used to be.
Right.
But if you think about where the sport was, just say 2010 to today, right? Like it's pretty unbelievable how far we've come from 2010. If you take another decade from 2000 forward, it's really unbelievable where this, like, even if you look at nutrition, right? Just the variety of nutrition and the ability for like our understanding of using nutrition and the variety of choices that you have and the ability to truly dial, if you can stick to it, a pretty precise nutrition strategy across almost any distance for any runner. That didn't exist in the early 2000s, right? We were all
Yeah.
like, chewing those power bar like bricks, right?
Right.
Sort of hoping that it was enough, but it's yeah, forward progress is going to happen, and hopefully there can be some influence by the sport to control it, but the sport's almost like we've got a tiger by the tail almost, and we're just trying to figure out how to manage it. So
Yeah, yeah. I similar to that, I grew up in the Pocono Mountains and it's pretty much just a vacation area for New Yorkers. And so I was born and bred to hate New Yorkers because they come in every weekend, they're loud, they're obnoxious, they park anywhere. Despite that, I lived in New York City for 20 years after the fact, but so I was one of those jerks. But without the New Yorkers, the Poconos wouldn't exist. They bring in all the money and they build the homes, that they pay taxes on but aren't actually there a lot of the time. So it's one of those kind of like, you just sort of lived, you coexist, but you appreciate, that if it weren't for them, as much as you may or may not like them, it is what it is, and you exist because it's a tourist industry. Um, so this sort of piggybacks off that last question. And this is something I think maybe very specific to ultra running since you guys do the race registration. I think a lot of events, again, seeing it in gravel, seeing it in pretty much any sport that's growing, is you have, people take notice, especially those with money, and they start buying up events, right? Whether it be triathlon or cycling, like, here's Rick Prince's, like backyard, ultra, and now it gets bought up by XYZ. Um, Similarly, do you feel or have you heard from ultra runners that like they're fearing the lack of identity that used to be Rick Prince's Ultra, and now it's going to be owned by, Toyota and whatever. Is there a big concern amongst ultra runners that there's a similar to that last question that there's going to be a sort of dilution of the identity of ultra running, these really cool little niche events?
yeah, so and we've lived through the Iron Man period of ultra running, right?
Yeah.
And we're not out of it, and I don't know that we'll ever be out of it, but we've lived through it. And when that first happened, when we first heard of Iron Man buying into UTMB, like
Yeah.
the speculation started to get formed, right? That this is what it means, right? That Iron Man is going to come to the US and they're going to buy up all the races. And we didn't have any reason to doubt that, right? When you look back at what Ironman did in triathlon, they did go on a pretty aggressive acquisition or building spree in the sport of Ironman, and they did become the de facto platform in the US for triathlon. And it got to the point that it almost was like Coca-Cola or Kleenex or Xerox, right? That people weren't saying they were racing a long course triathlon, right? Or a full, full course tri. It was an Ironman, right?
Yeah, it was a brand. Yeah.
Yeah, it became ubiquitous with the sport. And so I think the early concerns of the iron manification of trail running and the loss of the unique characteristics of your local trail race director were probably well founded at first. What we pretty quickly realized, and Ultrasignup sort of uniquely positioned because we work with all these race directors and we're able to hear all the chatter. And I spend most of
Sure.
my time with my ear to the ground on the sport as a whole. And what we heard was like a couple things were happening. One, some race directors just weren't interested in talking to Ironman, right? They weren't going to be part of it. They weren't going to sell their races, any of that. Um, the other thing we heard was that even the race directors that not all of them, but race directors that were talking to Ironman couldn't find a deal that made sense because
Hmm.
Ironman wanted them to stay and run the races for years, and a lot of race directors are very independent by nature and said, "Well, the reason I started this race is because I don't like working for other people. So why would I sell to you and then work for you, right?" And so that
Sure.
created like another challenge for Ironman because to Ironman's credit, maybe they recognized that it was important to have continuity of the race and in the way it was produced and having that race director at the race. And so they felt it was really important to have that continuity by having that race director stay on for a couple of years. The third thing we saw was that Ironman was having a hard time finding races that were big enough to have it make sense. Right?
Hmm.
In the US, the average trail race is probably somewhere, and we have this exact number somewhere in our data pool, but it's last I heard 65 to 70 runners per race. Like that's the
Okay.
average size of a trail. And and that means that this sport has a really long tail of small local races that are just too small for a company to come in and try and scoop up a market share of races, right? It's just too hard. A individual race director who has great creativity and drive can figure out a way to make money out of 60 registrants, right? Ironman can't figure out a way to make money off 60 registrants.
Right.
So so I think that there's a unique structure to this market that is going to make it largely insulated from anyone coming in and taking over 40% of the races in the US and turning them
Hmm.
into like the rock and roll series.
Yeah.
It's just too hard to make the math work. Now, it doesn't mean that and I have no indication of this, but it doesn't mean that some of the bigger races that are beginning to attract thousands and thousands of people to the race won't be outsized targets of acquisition from whether, I think Ironman is largely pretty pretty stable in terms of their acquisition plans in the US, but there's going to be somebody else, right? You know, there'll be some other brand that wants to come in and start acquiring races. And the biggest races are going to be the targets. I don't think Western States, Hard Rock, Vermont. Again, the math doesn't work. I mean, you've only got 140 or 360 people racing. That's really hard.
Yeah.
Nonprofits. So, but it's going to be the races that are getting built and the thousands of people per numbers that there will be targets. And is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? It's it has the potential to be a good thing, right? Just big companies aren't all inherently bad, right? They don't
Right.
come in and ruin stuff. They they might have a tendency to do that, but I think that the right partners that really appreciate and understand the sport and take a long-term vision of the sport might not be terrible. And I think one decent example of that is Lifetime, right? Lifetime has not ruined Leadville. I mean, it's not the same Leadville that it was before Lifetime bought it, but they've also been generally speaking, pretty good stewards of that race. And I think
Hmm.
it remains one of the iconic races on the calendar, pros put it on the calendar. They want to go race it. Age groupers want to go race it. And
Yeah.
so that, that's one where I think you could point to and say if there were more lifetimes that came in and bought up big races, they may not ruin them. They'll put their own unique twist on it, but they may not ruin it. So
Yeah. Yeah. Those are great points. Those are, I mean, all really good points. And I think maybe one of the best points is I think amongst these sort of niche, smaller sports, even though they're certainly growing, is that, corporations are inherently evil. And anything they touch in its entirety is bad, right? And like, again, that might be true with a couple points here and there, or maybe it is true for some corporations, but I think that it always, I think behooves people to give, sort of the benefit of the doubt, and hopefully it will go in the right direction, and they'll keep, some of the ethos of these events, the way they were.
yeah, and the one truth is that when a company comes to the sport, if if the community makes it harder for them to come to the sport, then the relationship is going to be fragmented from the start,
Yeah,
right?
great
Like,
point.
I mean, and so we all have a choice in how we respond to things, right? And how do we try and because I would imagine almost every non-endemic brand that wants to come into the space would really prefer to have some some ears of the leaders of the sport, however those are classified, right? They want help, right? They don't want to make
Sure.
mistakes. They don't want to step on rakes that they don't have to, right? They want to do right because doing right generally means that they do better, commercially. But if as soon as we hear they step in the sport, like Twitter explodes with this is the worst thing that's ever happened and we should all boycott it. Like it's probably not going to stop them from coming, but it's probably going to make their entry to the sport bumpier, which is not good for anybody, right?
Yeah,
So
great point.
so I try and leave myself open and accessible to anyone that's interested in the sport, that wants to talk about the sport, that wants to learn about the sport, and how should I come to the sport? Those are opportunities that I always welcome because I don't have all the answers, but I definitely can tell you what not to do more. I can tell
Yeah.
you what not to do more so than I can tell you what to do. Uh,
Yeah.
but sometimes knowing that is, more important, right? So.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Um, so going back to the pickleball thing and just ultra and things, word of mouth. We hear from a lot of our coaches that ultra running is addictive. People maybe that moved up from marathon that did this, like, oh my God, this is what's been missing from my life. I can personally say that back in the, I guess, God, I'm dating myself now, but back like in the late 90s, when I was in college, I ran cross country and track. And again, living in the Poconos, I always trained on the trails. That's just, it wasn't even like trail running. It's just, I chose to run on trails. I don't know if trail running was even a thing or a word
Yeah.
at that point. But I'm like, oh my God, this is just so much better than running on the road. I'm out here in the trees and it's peaceful and whatever. What do you think makes ultra running and I guess, by proxy, trail running, what makes it so addictive? Like what is that magic sauce or sauce is maybe that makes it addictive that people are just like, I'm all in, I want to keep scaling and run further and longer, and this is the coolest thing ever.
Yeah. So, there's I think there's two parts to it. One is just the inherent physiology of our ability to improve, right? And like the addictive nature of getting on, like beginning to do something and beginning to see improvement and wanting more. Like psychologically or physiologically, our body sort of craves that constant development. And anyone that's come, let's use road running for an example, right? Road running is there's a few areas where you can really improve, right? It's like your cadence and your footfall and your pace, things like that. But there's not a whole lot of technical improvement that can happen in road running, right? You're really trying to find like an almost a metronome state that you can maintain for a long time, right? And you can deal with the slight inclines and things like that. But there's not a ton of opportunities for you to feel little wins. But I think you come to trail running and you almost start all over again, right? And so you start climbing that plateau of little wins and little wins and little wins. And what we recognize in trail running as participants is there's a lot of areas that you can get better at trail
Yeah.
running. There are a lot of real technical components to becoming maybe not even faster, but just more. durable on the trail, right? Being able to weather that experience. So I think there's that component to it that is a really unique part of human nature. The second thing is, we live in a world where we're increasingly disconnected from nature for most of us. And in Japan, they have this thing called forest bathing, right? It actually gets prescribed to people by doctors, which is
Oh,
just
interesting.
go out in the woods and just sit in the wood, like sit under a tree and it's like you will get a prescription to go. I'm
Huh.
sure the Japanese term translated is not technically forest bathing, but that's the idea, right? Is get
Yeah.
in nature and disconnect yourself from what you're doing here in your day to day. And there are like deep, again, physiological benefits that people start realizing. It reduces cortisol and helps improve sort of endorphin, all that sort of stuff. Well, trail running is the same thing, right? That's the maybe the type A way to go forest bathing for us is that but no, I don't want to go sit under a tree. I want to run and see as many trees as I can. And so I think there's that component to it. I think that we as humans, we just find peace and connection with nature. And I think the more people discover that, the more they want it. They want to be out there. There's almost a there's you're almost pulled to it once you get exposed to it once. And
Yeah.
it is addictive, but it's a good addiction, right?
Yeah.
We want more and more of those good addictions in life. So that's what I think. I think that it's the little wins that sort of keep happening, and the variety of the terrain, right? Like you there are endless options for trail runners if they want to explore all the trails in this country, and they will all be unique. They'll all be different, and that's just something that you can't find anywhere else. And so.
Yeah. I appreciate that perspective. So last question. So what's next for Ultrasignup? Anything, again, even if you want to even discuss, clearly you don't have to, but anything cool that you guys got going on in the pipeline?
Yeah, so I'll talk on the sort of technical side, and then I'll talk on the sort of non-technical side. But on the technical side, we've been spending the last 4 years really sort of getting the platform ready for its future, which is a lot of work. And we know the sport's been patient with us as we sort of work through. This platform was started in 2009, right? So anything that started that long ago in the technology world is um is going to have sort of a unique journey to modernization. And so we're really coming close to the completion of that underlying modernization journey of Ultrasonic, which is exciting. And that's a lot of stuff people can't see, but it's the stuff that had to be done so that we can start building the stuff that people will see, which is
Yeah.
where I get most excited. So, you'll begin to see things like a refreshed sort of look and feel for the platform, which is not just designed to have a fresh look and feel to it, but it's designed to give the framework for us to start building sort of the next generation of ultrasonic, which will be more unique and dynamic data visualization. So we think there's a lot of data that sort of lives around racing that's not being captured and visualized in a really interesting way right now. Obviously, we have results on the platform. We put a ranking to that, but all of the data that happens on the course or all the training that leads up to that race is really fragmented across Strava or across training
Hmm.
or wherever. Um, and so you'll see much more data, all designed to one, help race directors understand their business and the landscape of race directing more broadly, but really to help racers and coaches really more intelligently navigate how they approach a particular race for a particular runner at a particular time.
Hmm.
So we're excited about that. You'll begin to also see sort of more social features on the platform, I would think. So the ability for you to keep tabs on what your friend is doing. Are they looking at certain races? Are they racing certain races? Should I join them? Um, so that's a lot of what you'll see on the technical side, which is things that I've been really excited to see get built, and hopefully they'll start getting rolled out here in the next year or so. On the non-technical side, you'll see Ultrasignup sort of around the sport more and more. We have these dirt circus events that we put on around the country, which are really best way to describe them are like race director expos. So
Okay.
they end up being anchored around a running store. And then we invite our local race directors from the community to come and set up a booth so that they can have an opportunity to connect with runners. We bring brands in so they can set up a booth as well. And we create this mini expo environment. We invite 250 to 400 runners for free just to really come and have an opportunity to go on a short community run, 5K or something like that, and then come back and give the race directors a chance to tell people about their race. Race directors don't have a lot of opportunities to interact with people in person except on race weekend, which is not the best
Hmm.
time to really, the race directors are kind of busy. So we really wanted to carve out a way for them to do that. And so we'll have 8 of those this across the country this year. We had one just last weekend in Phoenix with 400 people there, which was really
Oh,
exciting.
nice.
So you'll see more of that. And then you'll see us out at Western States. We'll have some activations out there, Broken Arrow, things like that, where we're really trying and to support that community to create sort of a week-long festival of trail racing, right? I think a lot of us look to UTMB with a lot of jealousy that they've got something over there that we don't have. But when you take a step back, we really have almost the exact same thing that happens in Tahoe in June. It's just 2 different races, really 3 different races. You've also got Tahoe 200 that happens right in that window. And we've really been advocating for the past few years of how can we stitch Broken Arrow and Western States together so that there's a week long of activity all happening in that Olympic Village. And so you'll see us there this year, really trying to continue to sort of drive that narrative forward. So yeah,
That's awesome. It's a lot
that,
of work, both online and offline. I'm impressed.
it's a lot, but we enjoy it. We've got a great team. So when we bought the platform, there was really no team. There was really Mark and there was one part-time customer service person, and now there's a team of 18 that are sort of scattered all over the US. So I always say this, if you bump into someone that works for Ultrasignup, like give them a hug. They work too hard and make too little money, like most people in the industry, right?
Yeah.
But they're doing it all to try and help you as an athlete have better experience out there on your journey. And they're all trail runners, so it's trail runners sort of on the platform for the platform, which is really sort of a nice, exciting sort of continuity between the business and the sport. So
Yeah, that is very cool. Well, David, thank you so much for your time on this. I feel like your insights that you brought to this, it's like I see little snippets here and there, via USCO, but I don't sort of get the whole picture. So I feel like this completed a lot of that for me personally. For our listeners, you can go to their Instagram, Ultra Sign Up, and then ultrasignup.com to their website to check out more. If any of our listeners are interested in a USCO certification, you can use the word or the code ATE75 for $75 off. All right. Well, David, thank you so much for your time again. I know you are an extremely busy man, especially with all the on and now offline stuff you guys are doing. So look forward to following you guys.
absolutely. Thank you, Rick.
All right. You got it. Thank you.